I'll call the November 9th, 2021 Lake Mills Public Works Board meeting to order. Who's taking notes today? Is it Misty?
Yes.
All right, can you take the roll call, please?
Mr. Picard?
Here.
Mr. Temperley?
Here.
Mr. Fields?
Here.
Mr. Polachek?
Here.
Mr. Reich? Mr. Rupplinger?
Here.
Thank you.
Up next, correction and approval of the minutes of October 12th, 2021. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve. This is Mark.
I'll second. This is Bennett.
We'll just do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, the minutes are approved. Questions and public comment? Is it just consultants tonight there in the room?
Correct.
Okay. Then we'll move on to the director's report.
All right, thanks. We have only 2 items on the agenda, but I suspect they're going to be lengthy items, so I shall be quick. The first item is the LSL replacement program again. I think we replaced one since our last meeting. That takes us to about 44 units. So far we've paid out through the loan fund $132,200 approximately. And we know there's a few more coming in. So I think next month we'll have our final, well, I know next month we'll have our final report for the year because that loan fund will be over then. AMI update, nothing too exciting there. We're still plugging in a few electric meters and no water meters because we haven't received those yet. We have been told that we should see those water meters by the middle of February, or excuse me, January. Let's see, a PEPR contract, you asked me to keep you informed on that. We are going to work with them to complete transferring a couple of overhead right-of-way lines, convert them to underground. There's not a lot there. It's probably in total of 100 yards of stuff that we're going to try to replace yet this year. And again, that's just trying to get these private right-of-ways underground so we don't have to get in the backyards and trim trees and that sort of thing. The next thing is filling positions. This is something you're probably going to see a lot of in the next months. Yeah, we replaced one of the employees in the water department. One of our guys had got hired by Oconomowoc, and so we've replaced him with a young guy who, as far as doing very well, very green, but he's doing very well and learning things. We are going to have to be replacing someone in the streets department because of a retirement, and that was our lead foreman, Dave Ward, will be retiring. I think his last day on the job is December 8th. So we are in the process of going through that. And then finally, I've been informed by one of our electric line workers that they are being considered for a position in another city at a significantly higher wage. And so I've been buying him donuts every day to try to keep him around. I'm not sure if that's going to work, but we may be replacing somebody in the electric department fairly soon also. The next topic, water main breaks on North Ferry Drive. It was about a week ago. We replaced or had a leak on Ferry Drive, and this would be just a little bit south of the of Bartles Beach. I don't know if you know where the sewer lift station is there, just a little bit south of the beach. Everything went quite well. They dug it up, no problem, repaired it, and then when they were backfilling, they noticed that the water was leaking again. So their first thought was that the sleeve they put on didn't hold. But indeed, when they dug it up again, there was another break about 3 feet north of that one. And those 2 breaks were actually holes in the bottom portion of the pipe. There's a lot of reasons for holes in the pipe. We aren't 100% sure what caused those. It could be electrolysis, could be poor soil conditions, or a combination, whatever. So they repaired that one. And then as they were backfilling again, another leak popped up, and this one was about 5 feet south of the first one. That one was more of a crack. And our theory right now is that that may have cracked from compacting after backfilling for the first two. What it told us is the pipe is probably pretty brittle. So, two reasons I'm telling you this. I don't usually tell you a lot about main breaks, but when you have 3 of them within about 12 feet, that's a big deal. One is now we're looking at whether or not we have to be getting in there and replacing that section, just like we did on Main Street. That is a problematic area. I think we've got 4 or 5 other areas that we've dug up in the last 5 years. Same type of thing, holes in the pipe. And the second reason I tell you is that when something like this happens, if we'd have been able to fix just one, there's X amount of cost to it. This particular scenario cost us a little over $10,000 to repair. And my point here is that repairing water main breaks is a heck of a lot more expensive than replacing that many feet of pipe. So we are going to be looking at whether or not we need to do something there in the next year. And the other point is that these things happen, and these are the things that contribute to some of the cost for maintaining our system. And so there's 2 parts here. One is that, of course, we've got to repair it. The other one is we got to figure out why it happened. And again, if it's soil conditions or if it was poorly installed or whatever, we need to focus on that. So I wanted to give you a heads up in that regard. The next 2 items I'll kind of lump together. Ace Hardware put a significant solar system on the roof of the building there next to Walgreens, and they're going to produce about 66,000 kilowatt hours a year with their system, which is about 63% of their annual usage. That means a rough payback of 8 to 10 years. And the other thing is that Lakeside already has some solar panels on the roof of the high school there. They're looking at putting more on. And just got another call. This one's real early, so I won't name the company or anything, but another significant large company in Lake Mills is looking at putting solar on the top of their building also. Solar's starting to take off, and I guess just renewable energy in general is really starting to take off. We know that there have been companies talking to some of the residential customers about putting solar on their homes and that sort of thing, and I think this is just the beginning of what's going to happen, and that's a good thing.
Paul, Mark here, what's the impact for the utility on that? Do we have extra work to do, change out the meter, or is it just information and a general good thing?
It's, well, good question. It's a two-edged sword. We don't have a lot physically to do. We have meters now that are actually capable of operating both directions, so if they're producing more than they're using, that the meter will reflect that. Most of these are not going to be large enough to actually put energy back on the grid, so from that standpoint, not a lot for us to do. However, like I say, it's a double-edged sword. The more energy that's produced by solar systems has an impact on the kilowatt hours that we sell. And there does come a point of diminishing returns there. We did find with some of the energy conservation some time back that they were so successful that they actually impacted the rates and the utility somewhat negatively. So we have to keep an eye on this. Again, we're not going to discourage people from putting solar up, but we certainly have to be ready for how it is going to impact the utility financially. Does that kind of get to your question, Mark?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's good and it's bad. I think overall it's good. The next item is the street construction progress. So I'm going to turn this one over to Dwayne, and I'll just give you a warning. His voice is a little soft, so go ahead, Dwayne.
Thanks, Paul. It's going to be short. Street construction progress. We're really wrapping things up for the year. Most all projects are in a punch list stage. We are working with Betsy and the contractors to final out the payments, and the final payments and anything that has to be held as far as liquidated damages or payments into the spring for any kind of restoration that needs to be done yet. If there's any questions, I can try to answer them, but for the most part, things are wrapping up for the season. Thanks, Paul.
I got one quick question. Thanks for getting Highway A open. I see they were taking the barricades down on my way home from work. On Mulberry Street, right by Moss, there's a section right down the center line that's still unpaved when they patched on both sides. Is that scheduled to get filled in yet this fall?
Okay, could be, are we talking between Moss and, say, Grant Street?
Correct. Yep.
Okay,
There's by the 800 block there.
Yes, Steve. What we decided to do there, if you recall, that project is being held to be constructed with Moss Street and Prospect in the capital improvement plan. And the intention there is to take the storm sewer from the work that was done on Mulberry Street in 2019 and extend it into that project. What we decided to do this year as a temporary fix for that one block area, there was quite a bit of damage to the street pavements. It was deteriorating to the point where there was a number of puddles. But rather than restoring the entire street there, what we did is we did a what's called a scratch coat layer over the top in that block. We tried to just level out some of the puddles. We paved into the curb a little bit to try and minimize the puddles that were there and to try and maintain the existing pavement. I believe in the capital improvement plan, that project is set for 2025. So the goal is to get about 4 years out of that pavement. We will keep an eye on it. Obviously, the street department will look to maintain any other potholes that need to be maintained during that time. But this was a cost-effective kind of placeholder, as you will, to hold until that storm sewer can be placed with that project in 2025. Hope that answered your question, Steve.
Yep, that'll work. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dwayne. I will just note that I think if you remember, as we reported during the summer, we were very concerned about how the end of the year was going to play out because of contractors' inability to get parts and then how blacktop was going to come in and all that sort of thing. But I believe we actually finished earlier this year than we have in many years in the past with getting almost everything done. So overall, it was a hectic, stressful, but effective year, I would say. And so that completes my report for tonight.
All right, thanks. So item 6, discussion on electric utility overview. I think you've got consultants that are going to give a presentation.
Yeah, we have a lot of folks here that are going to work on this one. We're going to come at this from a couple different ways. We want to talk a little bit about some of the work that's been done on the system over the years and how that affects rates. And that'll be done by Eric Anthon and Bruce Beth from our electrical engineers, Forrester. And then, as you recall, we had WPPI do a cost of service study for us to be ready this month. And so they'll be able to go over the specific actual numbers of some of the things that are driving our costs and that sort of thing. And so with us from WPPI are Nicole Gould and Tim Ament. And so I think what we're going to do, Eric and Bruce, is start with you. And what we've got to do here then is have you guys just share your screen and go through the slides.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. This is Eric from Forrester. I guess to everyone from Lake Mills, thanks for having us here. Appreciate that. Bruce and I will go through basically this PowerPoint that we've come up with to explain, from a historical point of view, where your system was and kind of where it has evolved to. So with that, I guess, Bruce, if you'd like to start in.
Okay, hi, this is Bruce Beth, and I've been working with you guys on your system for decades. Think back to when the transmission line was being planned to come through Jefferson County, and there was talk of it not going through Lake Mills. And we worked extensively with you and a newly formed company called the American Transmission Company, and got them to route the transmission line through Lake Mills, which normally you probably would say is not a good thing, but it's like the interstate was coming through your area, and were you gonna get an off ramp or not? So without the interstate anywhere near your off ramp wouldn't have been very good. But with the interstate, in this case the transmission line, coming through Lake Mills, we were able to build a substation, and that's probably the first big infrastructure improvement you've done. Erica, you want to advance the slide?
Yep.
And what I'm trying to focus on are three things: is how you get the power to Lake Mills, how you get it through Lake Mills, and how you get it to your customers. And we made three big investments in infrastructure in those three areas over the past few decades, couple decades here now.
Sorry about this. I just want to make sure, which slide are you seeing?
I seen the front page.
Okay, apologize here.
So I wonder if there you go. So back before the Tyranina substation was built, you were a distribution customer on a distribution system. You were no better than a farm along the way, right? If the line tripped out between Jefferson and Johnson Creek, Lake Mills was entirely out of power. They had a switchover scheme, but that failed after a while, and it wasn't ideal. So what we've done is made the big leap from being a distribution customer on someone else's distribution system to having your own connection to the transmission system and a distribution voltage that can cover your entire service territory without any further substations required. We're still in the process of getting there from where we have been. So let's look at the historical timeline. Let's see, how was the system configured prior to 1990? You were at subtransmission, you were served by subtransmission, and you had a 4,000 volt distribution system. In 1990, that subtransmission became a distribution voltage. And I'm going to kind of flip through this, but I'm happy to come back and answer questions, or if anybody wants to, interrupt in the way, feel free to do so. So next slide. So the big thing was we reconfigured the system so that now it's a 138 kV, 138,000 volts to 24,940 volts, I'll say 25 kV for between friends here. Which is the ultimate configuration, but for now we still have a lot of customers that are served off a 4,000 volt distribution system. So we have had to make some investments to buy you time to eventually get rid of that 4,000 volt system. Next.
Hey, Bruce.
Yes.
Why do we want to get rid of the 4,000 volt system?
Well, that leads right into the next slide. There's some advantages to 4,000 volt, and then the slide after this will say why you don't want it. It was the only voltage before, but and the advantages are you don't have to trim trees because the wire kind of trims them for you. It burns them. It doesn't trip, but that's not always good because then things get destroyed or burned up, overloaded. It will trip an entire feeder. Like there's no sectionalizing you can do. It just when a squirrel hits a line and bam, the whole feeder's out. It can't serve big customers above 750 kVA. It really struggles to serve So industrial base is not great with 4160 volt. Voltage drop is an issue, especially when you get out into the rural areas. And you have high amperes, high arc flash, the heating of the conductors, more losses. It's not significant, but it is not the most efficient voltage. 24/9 has a lot of advantages because we can stack and coordinate things so that less customers are affected by a fault. We can extend the feeder links. There's no concern about voltage drop. We can minimize arc flash energy with hotline tags, which we put into the new relays. The low neutral current, because there's, at higher voltage you use less current to deliver the same amount of power. That means you don't get neutral to earth voltage showing up in cow contact areas on farms and things. It's more efficient, for industrial commercial customers. Less amps, so less losses. Requires less substation equipment, and and eventually it can be automated. The devices that sectionalize can be with communication can talk to each other and resectionalize and restore power to more people more quickly. So in 2007, we did a long-range plan. Actually, you built a 2-transformer substation called Tyranina substation when the transmission line came through. Ironically, that's a big ticket expense you went through, but it probably had the least impact on your rates. You made a big investment, but by securing a connection to the transmission system, you bypassed a lot of other distribution fees that you were paying. And the net effect on rates was, I recall, not that bad. But in 2010, we began to make use of this new substation by extending those 25 kV circuits into parts of town that had previously only been served by 4160, particularly like McDonald's area, Culver's area too. That there was a TID project there, and we put some effort into getting 24/9 to serve that area, to get around the lake. We at least to both the north and south sides of the lake. We got two-way feed there. We did quite a bit of extension of lines, but then there was not enough was done, and before we could get it all converted, there were substations that you had that were stepping the voltage further down to the 4160 volt system. There was a Pine Street substation kind of behind where Ace Hardware is now, and there was a downtown substation. If some of you might remember when the utility office was downtown, there was an old building. Now it's kind of it was the Parks building, and I don't know what it's more of an artisan place now, I believe. But the substation was built into the side of the building, and we had to retire that. We replaced it with 5 green boxes located around Lake Mills to step that 25,000 volts down to 4,000 volts and eliminate those substations. Now, if we had converted everything, we wouldn't have had to do that, but those step-down transformers at those 5 locations have bought you another 20 years to do the conversion, which is a feature, which I'll hit on a little bit later. Next. So how is it positioned for future growth? I know there were some questions. I listened to your discussion when Paul did this, and Steve both did a really great explanation of the electric system earlier this year. There was a question, I believe, about the reliable capacity, and it is 41 MVA. And you're, you had been at 19 MVA at some point. You're probably less than that now, more like 14, 15. But you have a long ways to grow before you have to make any more investments in substation. So we define that as if one of the 2 transformers were out of service, the other one could serve all the load. So each transformer is sized for 41 MVA, with all the fans running and everything, cooling it down. It's not being pushed at all. So we expect this substation to last a good long time. In terms of substation, you're poised very well for future growth. How about the distribution system? Well, we have some limitations because there's no 24/9 north of the interstate. And what we want to do is get 2 circuits up there. There's one that can be converted, the other one where we've actually got the duct in ready to go across at County A someday and make a loop up there. If there was ever any development up there, you would be poised to extend power well north. You serve a large area north of Lake Mills, which is good in terms of a buffer between your competition. So that area is yours to serve, and you have the voltage to serve it. We'd like to put that off until there's people buying power after you make the investment, but we have a good plan in place to do that. Next. Yeah, and that's just an example of, there was in the city's long-range plan, there was some development ideas north of the interstate, and we put some estimates together in a long-range plan. Of course, those estimates will have to be refreshed when the time comes, but at least we have a good plan to serve that area. Next. Okay, so when that transmission line came through and when that substation was built, ATC was still kind of developing their rules, and you have exposure of transmission faults from all the way from Jefferson to Waterloo. It doesn't happen often, but if it does, it will take out all of Lake Mills. And we have been a constant thorn in ATC side, reminding them of that fact. They are pretty proud of how good their service is, but last time we talked to them, they said, actually, you meet 3 of the criteria for getting breakers, and so they invited us to petition. That's free to you, right? ATC will put breakers in, and then no transmission line faults will trip off Lake Mills. That would be awesome. We'll keep pursuing that for you, but that's kind of things that you might notice. We have 4 25 kV circuits. Only 3 are being used. The 4th one's poised to be extended north of the interstate. All the circuits we built were fat wire, I'll put it that way, and they come with green boxes, and in order to tap that fat wire, you had to put some sort of sectionalizing device in. What I envision in the future is that you will be building more subloops off of that backbone to serve neighborhoods, and this kind of goes right along with a unit price contract that we recommended you pursue earlier this year. That's where a contractor can be brought in to put in units as defined by the line crew. Your line crew can do some of the work, can lay out some of the work, can bring in the contractors to do whatever they need assistance with, but that is a great way to extend the 25 kV system to serve all the residents of Lake Mills and continue to retire the 4 kV system. The thing I like about that is that instead of you seeing these 3 big jumps in the investments you've made over the past, you're going to see more modest investments in infrastructure each year. If you were comparing yourselves to, say, Oconomowoc or Jefferson or Hartford, all municipal utilities that have the same very similar experience with ATC and with the 25 kV as a distribution voltage, they all faced what you faced in the 1990s and 2000s. They faced that in a decade before you. When the sub-transmission system became a distribution system, they built their substations because they had transmission there. You had to wait till 2007 to actually do this because the transmission line didn't come to your town until then. So you're seeing some of the jumps that they saw in decades prior in terms of infrastructure investment, plant value going up. You saw that later. It's maybe not fair to compare yourselves to them because they've withstood those big jumps at an earlier stage, and you are more recently having those jumps. But the good news is I don't anticipate those jumps in investment continuing, or at least they be spread out over time. Ideally, if you reinvested in plant value the amount that you depreciate each year and maintained a constant level of plant value, you would have very stable rates. Which is a good segue to our friends at WPPI, who can explain more about rates and the impact that all of these wonderful things have on what you pay for power. But the last slide is that just questions. I would just throw out that I'd heard there's some talk about power factor and load factor, and I know that you have some very knowledgeable people on this this meeting about electricity, and so I was, just for the benefit of everybody, just define those two terms. And power factor is the amount of amps, I'll say, in kVA, that you have to deliver in order to accomplish work. If work was defined as watts or kilowatts, that's work that's done usefully. If you have to use less kVA to do the same watts, the ratio between the two is power factor. So efficiency is better with better power factor. That it doesn't really have a cost to you. Especially at 24.9, the power factor isn't generating extra amps and extra losses because the amps are lower. And besides that, the penalties that you used to pay, or the incentives, I'll say, because it's just the flip side of penalties, the incentives went away. You used to be able to put capacitors out there and correct your power factor and make it unity, so the most efficient delivery system you could do, and you got rewarded for that, but they took away that reward. There's no incentive financially for you to correct power factor any longer, and as capacitors need to be removed from the system, as they fail, as the fuses blow, we're taking them down. We're not spending the money to put more back up because there's no return on that investment. So your power factor might slip a little, but it has no effect on rates. Load factor is a bigger issue. That is more like the pace at which you use electricity. If you use a lot in a short period of time, you have to build a system to serve that, but yet you're not delivering as much energy as you could because it's all bunched up in one time period. And load factor does affect your average cost of power, and maybe I answered your questions, but if you have any before we move on to the rates, I'd be happy to answer them.
So this is Todd. If load factor is high, it makes it more expensive?
If load factor is high, you're using power at a more constant rate. So the definition of load factor is the energy you actually deliver, kilowatt hours that you deliver. If that were used at a constant pace, how many, at the pace of the highest demand, how many kilowatt hours could your system deliver, and how many did you deliver? So if the ratio is high, it means you're more efficient in your delivery. You got a flat load curve over time.
I think, said another way, if our load factor is low, that is more expensive.
Yes.
And we have a fairly low, we're under 50% load factor, I think, on average.
Your load factor is very indicative of a residential community. Maybe, it's very indicative of the character of Lake Mills. And, if you had the big industrial that had 3 shifts that ran all the time, the load factor would go way up there. And everybody benefits from that.
So what you're saying is because they're mostly residential, when we turn on the air in the summertime, and then it goes back down, that's bad
Yep.
for business.
Yep. And you know, the air in the summertime might be served by those new solar panels that people are putting up, and then instead we're going to be shooting load factor when people plug their electric vehicles in. So like things will change over time, but that it's the same concept. If you can flatten the pace at which you use electricity, you pay a lower average power cost.
So Mark here, is load factor that affects rates, is that, is the time period based on the hours in the day, like summertime air conditioners in the middle of the day versus at night? Or is it month to month? Over what time period is load factor, maybe I said the wrong word for it, over what time period is load factor important for rates?
Nicole, you want to take that one?
Sure. So in terms of when would load factor be important, you have seasonal rates in place for your wholesale. So the peak times are July and August, and then the shoulder months are June and September. So at that time, you pay a higher cost per kilowatt or demand. So those would be the peak times where if you have larger surges of demand, it would cost more for the utility.
And what about the analogy of having more industrial working 24/7, which would smooth out the demand over 24 hours? Does that also affect rates?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll just kind of segue into the presentation here, and I think that'll help explain things a little bit more.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, any more questions from the other board members in the first presentation? Okay, I guess continue on. Thanks.
Okay. My name's Nicole Gould, and I'm an electric rate analyst for WPPI Energy. And I also have with me Tim Ament, and he will be here to answer questions as well if needed. So there's the ultimate question of why I'm here tonight is, why are Lake Mills electric rates higher than the neighboring utilities? And there's three main reasons for that. The first is declining overall system sales. The second is a lower load factor, so that equals higher costs per kilowatt hour. And then the third reason why the electric rates are higher is the local system costs, depreciation, pilot, taxes, A&G, and distribution have all increased. And this next slide will give you a great look at that. So this is actually a 10-year history of Lake Mills. And as you can see, the total sold and used, the energy, you guys are, since 2015, your sales have declined by about 5 million kilowatt hours. So that's a pretty significant change in usage. The second factor is that load factor again. And back in 2015, the load factor was significantly higher at 53.2%. And it's been declining each year. This past year in 2020, it was about 46.4%. And then the third reason is those local O&M expenses. So as you can see, since 2016, that's gone up probably about $200,000. Depreciation as well, close to the 200,000 where it's increased. Taxes, which is payment to the city essentially, that's also increased significantly. So those are, in essence, those are the three things that are really driving the costs for Lake Mills. And there's a lot of information on that one slide, so it'll be there for your reference.
What's the definition of O&M again?
Operation and maintenance expenses.
Okay.
Your distribution costs, your transmission costs, etc. And your A&G, your administrative and general expenses. Yep. So if you look at those, the ones in green there, that's actually your power cost expenses. And if you take a look at that, that's actually been declining over the past 10 years. So your cost per megawatt hour has been declining. So it used to be in 2015, you were closer to $80 per megawatt hour. And this past year, we were about $73.61. So you've had a decrease in wholesale costs, but an increase in your local distribution expenses.
So does the cost per megawatt hour include the cost due to load factor?
I'm sorry, my phone's ringing here. Bad timing.
Does the cost in the megawatt hour, does that include or not include the effect from load factor variation year to year?
Well, if you take a look at this next slide, this will give you an idea of the impact of load factor and that cost per megawatt hour. So here I have a look at Lake Mills from 2018 to 2020, and the load factor again continuing to decline. And then I compared it to two other utilities just to see, you know, what is the impact if load factor would improve just by, you know, 2 to 4%, actually higher with utility B there. But the difference is a savings per megawatt hour would be between 2 and 4 cents, depending on the improvement.
Just for city administration's information, this wasn't in the slideshow that I got off the Lake Mills website a day or two ago. So I don't know if the city updated it since then or not.
Yeah, this 10-year history that you see here, that's actually something we produce a financial benchmark for the utility. So this is information that we do provide to the utility on an annual basis. And we have to wait for the PSC annual reports to be complete. And we typically update these in the fall of the year. So you'll be getting your historical that includes I gotta say this right. I'm sorry, it'll include 2020. So this will be coming out soon. And there's all kinds of different financial indices that are included in that report. This is just the snapshot of everything.
Yeah, what I'm saying is I did not get to see page 4, the following page, before you just showed it here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Yep.
normally it's in our packet, but I did not see that earlier.
Yep. Yeah, it's just a nice look at, okay, so if load factor was improved, what would be the impact on costs? And it would drive down the power costs per megawatt hour if load factor could be improved. Some other notable changes. So in 2017, WPPI did restructure the wholesale rate to include some seasonal demand components and some additional energy time periods. It would be a super on peak and a super off peak. But again, overall, the purchase power costs have decreased over the past 10 years on an annual basis. The last time a rate study was done for Lake Mills, it was completed in 2014 with a January 1st, 2015 effective date. So it's been 6 years since Lake Mills has been in for a study. We do like to see utilities come in every every 3 years, more so that we address inter-rate subsidies that might occur. So I know that I just got done presenting slides on why costs are a little bit higher compared to neighboring utilities, but if I actually plug in with the cost of service study, we would be looking at an potential increase in rates. And this was based with 2020 sales information. So it looked like about a 4.38% increase in base rates. I'm just kind of throwing it out there that the potential is there that if the utility wanted to actually increase its base rates, currently the utility collects only $10 in terms of a customer charge for its residential customers. The results of the cost of service study, the unbundled rate for your residential customers is closer to $38.40. So what that means is that for a customer to have the ability to turn on power 24/7, any new residential customer, you're actually paying closer to $40 to set up that customer, but currently you're only collecting $10 on a monthly basis for that customer.
And the highest monthly residential customer charge for municipal utilities in the state of Wisconsin is $16. One utility is at 16, two are at 15, and all the rest are less than that.
If you look at investor-owned utilities, they tend to be significantly higher in terms of customer charge. It's something that we definitely struggle with the Public Service Commission to edge that up. I would say right now, probably the most that you could collect for your fixed customer charge would be closer to 14. And as you continue to get more solar or distributed generation on your system, that's where it becomes important to collect as much as possible through that fixed cost.
I just want to make 2 points here real quick. One is we're not advocating a rate adjustment at this point unless you want to. So this is not a presentation to say here's what we should do. This is informational. The second thing is that, of course, if we don't collect all that we should through that service charge, we're subsidizing that elsewhere. So that's the debate, and I know we've had it, whether or not we should have a higher service charge and a lower kilowatt hour charge, or a higher kilowatt hour charge and a lower service charge. So that is part of the debate.
Correct. And this last slide kind of talks about speaks to the inter-rate subsidies. So should an increase in base rates actually be approached, the ones who would most likely see the largest increase would be your residential customers, general service. CP1 is actually showing a decrease, and CP2 would also be an increase. So you're essentially shifting your costs to the appropriate buckets, and it's never a direct, when you apply this to the Public Service Commission, ultimately they decide where your rates will be. They tend to follow pretty closely to this cost of service, but again, sometimes competition to neighboring investor owns for industrial customers can play into it as well. And that's all I have for you.
Nicole, I've got a quick question. You were saying over the last 10 years, rates have been, or the cost of per megawatt's been dropping. Where do you see that going in the near future?
Our we do 5-year projections for the power costs. It will be increasing slightly, but definitely, I don't think it's definitely not more than 2% per year. So very minimal increases.
That's a really good question, and a somewhat occasionally difficult one to answer. There's a lot going on there. We recently had a meeting at WPPI and talking about, this is a constant topic, of course, what's happening to the price of natural gas right now is going to have an effect. Phasing out coal is going to have there's so many factors that are going to come to play here. But I can tell you, based on how WPPI has positioned itself with fuels and that sort of thing, that I have a lot of faith in what Nicole said. And really it comes right from the top at WPPI also, that they've got a lot of safeguards in place. And so I think what she's telling you is accurate as anybody can get.
Well, this is Todd. I know in the past I've argued for not raising the fixed fee, but Nicole did mention that as people start going more solar, they're still going to need power, and it still costs us money to provide them to get that power. So I think we're going to have to start going towards applying more of a fixed fee increase, because it does cost us money to just provide a service, no matter how much power properties are using. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Is our depreciation
If I
expense
may add-
similar to other communities?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Is our depreciation expense similar to other communities of our size?
I would have to take a look at that. I can't answer that question. Sorry. I can certainly provide it to Paul.
This is Tim Amon from WPPI. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
One thing I want to say on that last question is that all the municipal utilities within the state of Wisconsin charge the same depreciation rates on their specific assets. So, for example, a substation in Lake Mills is charged the same depreciation rate as a substation in Oconomowoc. So given that, the rates are the same. However, there is going to be differences in the makeup of each utility's plant that they have in service to serve their customers.
Thank you.
Oh, I do have a question. Taxes, is that property taxes?
That's the payment in lieu of taxes that would go to the city,
Oh, the pilot program?
the pilot. Mhm.
Okay.
This is Bruce from Forester Engineering again, and I just noticed something on this slide that I should point out that ties the two presentations together. You know, the pilot and the depreciation are all percentages of the rate base, and she has a nice the second line from the bottom of the rate base you see was 7 million in 2011. If we go back, before 2007, it was probably 3 million. We added 4 million of rate base when we added that substation, but the fact that it went from 7 million to 13 million today has a little bit to do with the retirement of those substations and the build out of the 24/9 lines. Those things were added at a greater pace than what you depreciated. So you see the plant values built up, but you see the last year it's gone down because we're kind of curtailing that. And I think what you're going to see in the future is if you reinvest about what you depreciate and use that as a capital investment each year to accomplish that 20-year investment, perhaps you'll never have that big jump. That's what a 20-year plan does for you, is you say, where do I want to be in 20 years? And I want to have the 4 kV system gone, but I don't want to increase the rate base to do so. And, that's, I think, the thing that's driving the other costs, that if you're comparing yourself to others, I'm sure there's people that have a lot more than 3 million rate base, but for the amount of kilowatt hours you serve, is that the right amount? And I'd like to say that it's probably right at the right amount, but let's not let it get any bigger. Does that make sense? It's an engineer's perspective of a financial question, but I just, I want to take ownership for the part I'm responsible for here.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, the more plant you have in service, the higher your annual carrying costs are going to be for that plant, and that includes, depreciation expense, pilot, return on that plant in service, plus insurance for protecting those assets and things like that. So the higher that plant in service is, the more carrying costs you're going to have, and the higher the rates are going to be, because you have to recover those carrying costs. But Bruce is right on. I mean, if you can level out your the rate at which you add plant in service to pretty much match your depreciation rate, and keep that net rate base, net plant in service fairly constant, you will avoid any huge changes in your rates, at least due to plant additions and things like that. You still can have changes in rates due to changes in customers, loss of a customer, gain of a customer, and things like that. But as long as you can keep that plant in service relatively constant, your rates shouldn't have to change much due to any construction issues or anything like that.
So this is Todd. So what you're saying is we should spread out our plant additions rather than having one big addition?
To the extent possible, from a rate-based perspective, that would be recommended. Now, from an engineering perspective, I don't know if that's always possible to do, but at least from a rate base and rate making perspective, that has the least impact overall on your rates.
I'll just jump in here quick too. What's happening right now in Lake Mills with the housing developments and that sort of thing, those are capital intensive. So we have to spend dollars to put the cable in the ground, the transformers, et cetera, et cetera. That really won't show up as coming back for a few years, and so that the investment, and I think Tim used the term as much as possible, we have some control over. But as long as there's housing developments going on, we tend to lose a little bit of control of that. But then back to Bruce's point, that we've invested quite a few dollars over the last few years, and so we are sitting quite good as far as reliability, the capacity of the system, and that sort of thing. Typically, we talk about, again, a three-legged stool. I think I've mentioned that before: rates, reliability, and resources. And so we take a look at all those three as being combined. Rates, of course, the dollars and cents people pay. Reliability is a huge deal. People, believe me, when there's an outage, if you want to field a few phone calls, got nothing to do some night when there's an outage. And it's much easier, of course, to serve division when we get inquiries from large businesses that are wondering, do we have the capacity to serve a large plant or something like that. Where we're sitting right now is at 9 times out of 10, I think. I'm pulling it out of the air. But most often we can say, yes, we have the capacity. We are underutilizing what we have in place now. But as Bruce said, that is going to be around for a while. And so, again, the three-legged stool, we're trying to balance as much as we can. I hope that makes sense and adds a little something to this discussion. I guess my next question is, where do you want to go from here? Are we getting the answers to the questions that you have? Are there next steps that you're thinking about, or what would you like to do?
Who's that question directed to? The board?
Yes.
Well, I'd rather not raise rates, but what about the comment about spreading out the capital improvements? You're saying that's not easy to do, or?
Yeah, I'm saying it is. And, based on Bruce's comments, and he can jump in here, I think we'll still always have to keep the system up and do some improvements, but I think we have done a lot of it in the last few years, and I think he made the comment that we can start to taper off, possibly, and still maintain a good system.
Yeah, I'd second all of that. Just note that there was a time where you weren't spending money, you were saving money, and that resulted in the big jumps that you had to go through. Some of it wasn't in your control, but now that you're at a stable system, you have 20 years before the stuff that you invested in will have to be replaced, and I hope it doesn't have to be, because you'll be changing the delivery to the end user customers and hooking them up to the 24/9 system. And I'm so thrilled that your line crew has taken control of this and owning it, and coming up with ideas, and hey, I could do a little bit here and do a little bit here, and each year they're making some progress, and the year you take a year off is where you're going to take a step back, and then you're going to have to catch up again. So I think just the line crew taking charge of it is what's going to level it off.
And I just want to repeat and make sure you're clear, we are not at this point advocating any kind of rate adjustment. We are keeping an eye on that. I would think, as Nicole said, we're going to want to do cost of service studies on a more regular basis. But I am also confident that we can work through the next year financially, and take another look at the end of next year and see how we're doing. There's so many factors that are going to affect things, the growth of the city, the cost of fuel, all that sort of thing. Some things that we are looking at, however, has to do with our mapping system and an outage management system. These are not necessarily big ticket items, but they are things that can improve the system, improve our reliability, improve the service we provide to customers. So there are things we're going to be doing, but again, I'm not advocating at all any kind of a rate adjustment.
Well,
Considering
the agenda is discussion tonight anyway, so we really can't tell you to do anything.
Right, and I understand. I guess what I'm saying is that we were asked to kind of do this deep dive, and I want to make sure, number one, that you got the information you wanted and you understand it, and then number two, is there another step that you want us to move forward on without any kind of decision? But
Right.
What do you see as being next here?
Okay, I'll just leave that up to the individual board members. So Bennett, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say that it seemed like from the presentation, we're in a really good place. It seems like our current trajectory is fine. So it seems like stay the course. This was good information to have to know where we're at and in our position. But I mean, for me, it seemed like stay the course. There's no need to raise rates at this point in time. We got some other stuff on the back burner in terms of wastewater treatment plant right now. Is it fair to say we're knowledgeable about this right now? We're in a good position. We'll stay the course for the time being, and maybe take another look at some point in the future and see what we need to do at that point. Is that fair?
I agree with that. How about you, Greg? Do you have anything to say?
No, I agree with the last comment. I think stay the course. I feel a little more up to speed with where we're at. I'm good. Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah, I certainly don't advocate a rate increase as well. With all the experts online here, I do have another follow-up question. The local O&M expenses over the last 10 years vary quite a bit year to year. 2016 was 801,000. The previous year was a little over $1 million. Do any of the experts here have an explanation as to why that varies so much year to year? For local O&M expenses.
So one thing to point out, I guess, 2015, as you noted above, that's when the rate increase took place. One way to look up those O&M expenses, this matches directly to your PSC annual report. So I would most likely look at the schedules in that report to get that level of detail. And if you want the actual page number or the schedule, it would be E4 is what you would want to look at. And if you need help on how to access that information, I'd be happy to provide links to the committee members.
Yeah, we can provide them to Paul and he can send them out.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. But that's where you would find your O&M expenses. And like I said, it should match exactly to this report, and then you can see it in detail.
All right, any final questions or comments from the board? Okay, I guess we can move on. Item 7, discussion recommendation on the wastewater treatment plant facilities report.
All right, thanks, Todd. Well, we're back. And as we discussed last month, we have worked with Strand, and Travis Anderson is here, and I see that Jane Carlson is on the line also from Strand to talk a little bit about digging a little deeper into the options 2 and 3 and seeing where you want to go. A couple of things have happened since then. Number one is that survey, and thank you for responding to that. Obviously, it wasn't a survey, but it was more just to help prompt some discussion on just how we want to proceed. If you recall from the last meeting, that was one of the issues, is what it was one of the things that's driving what this plant looks like and how it operates and that sort of thing. So we do appreciate you for responding to that. Travis will go through that in a little bit. What he's going to do first is kind of a quick review from last month, and obviously give you guys another chance to ask some questions that you may not have been able to ask last month, or didn't even had a chance to think of last month, because this was a lot of information real quick. The only thing that I will remind you of is that, again, we need to keep moving forward on this. There are a lot of decisions that will be made over the next several months, several years, but we do need to start getting a direction here, and we also have to make sure that we meet the DNR deadlines for reporting on our facilities report and that sort of thing. So our intention, again, tonight is to get some kind of a recommendation, a specific recommendation to go to the council, and as possible, get that to the council before the end of the year. Obviously, next week would be fantastic if we can do that, but I just urge you to really ask you've got all the information you need. Travis and Jane have been working on this quite a bit. So I will shut up so they can do their thing. Go ahead, Travis.
Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. I'm just going to expand this PowerPoint here. Okay. So like Paul mentioned, first what I'm going to do is just give a quick recap on some of the slides that we went through at the last meeting. And if there's further background that you want to get into, certainly just let me know or chime in as we move along here. So just a refresher on the options that were evaluated. Recall that we looked at option 1, which was stay at the existing treatment plant and continue to discharge to Rock Creek. Option 2 was to stay at the existing treatment plant site, but to move the discharge location of the Crawfish River. And that had the advantages of less stringent limits, particularly in the case of phosphorus. The Rock Creek discharge will have a very strict phosphorus limit coming into effect in several years from now, versus the Crawfish River would have a limit that is the same as what the plant currently has. And then option 3 looked at relocating to a new treatment plant site that would discharge to the Crawfish River. And we looked at a few different options for those. So the improvements at the existing treatment plant site were similar for both options 1 and options 2. So I know the discussion at the last meeting resulted in wanting to look at just options 2 and 3. But this slide would basically show the improvements for option 2, so I'll just go through that real quickly. Because of capacity and age issues, most of the processes at the existing wastewater site need to be updated. So pretty much all of the structures and equipment need some type of attention over the next 10 years. So influent pump capacity needs to be expanded. Screening capacity needs to be expanded. There is a need for a new oxidation ditch within the next 10 years, depending on how loadings increase. New final clarifiers, again, needed to accommodate higher peak flows. Sludge storage is a concern capacity-wise in the future. There is a way to further capacity or increase capacity through construction of a new tank. Eventually, it's likely that off-site storage will be required, as we talked about at the previous meeting. Conversion to UV disinfection, and then filtration to accommodate TSS limits and potentially phosphorus limits. So all of those improvements would be necessary under both options 1 and 2. Option 2 would add the discharge to the Crawfish River. So effluent pumping station would be constructed with a force main that would pump over to the Crawfish River. We've got a few potential locations shown in this slide. And again, that gives you the benefit of less stringent effluent limits, particularly phosphorus right now, but potentially less stringent effluent limits for other criteria as well in the future if the Rock Creek stream becomes reclassified. And then option 3 looked at the new treatment plant location. As I mentioned, we evaluated 3 different technologies. The first being an oxidation ditch plant, which is what's currently used for treatment. We wanted to evaluate a range of options from what you're doing right now to more innovative technologies. Similar treatment plant would be an activated sludge plant, and all of these options include biological nutrient removal to reduce chemical costs related to phosphorus, and then to remove nitrogen, which is going to be included in future permits likely within the next 20 years. And then we looked at newer technology called aerobic granular sludge. This is an emerging technology in the U.S. There's only a few plants that are doing this, but we wanted to evaluate it because it does have some benefits, such as having a smaller footprint and being easier to expand as the needs for capacity increases in the future.
Everybody let's put on mute. I'm hearing a lot of paper shuffling. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So just really quickly here, we'll talk about some of the benefits. And again, I'm going to focus more on options 2 and 3 here. So that would be the existing treatment plant to the Crawfish River and then the new treatment plant. The benefits of option 2 are that you're keeping your significant investment that you've already made in your existing treatment plant site, and you would keep the existing phosphorus limit of 1 milligram per liter, which is a much easier limit to meet compared with staying on the Rock Creek. And this is, of course, a plant that is familiar for staff to operate. The benefits of the new treatment plant site is that it would result in the least stringent effluent limits, and it will be much easier to accommodate growth, because recall that the existing site is fairly landlocked, and there's while there is room for expansion, there are limits to what can be done on the existing site, and a new site would provide much more flexibility as far as just having the space available to accommodate future growth, particularly a higher rate of growth than the plant is seeing right now. It would also provide a buffer between the treatment plant and residences. Right now, the treatment plant is located right next to residential areas. Would have the ability to keep all the treatment facilities on one site. As I mentioned, it's likely at some point that off-site biosolids storage will be required at some point in the future. It would be it would more easily be able to serve growth that might occur north of the interstate in the future due to the proximity, and there'd be a potential to improve the quality of Rock Creek, and you'd be able to utilize new, potentially more efficient treatment technologies at a new site. The drawbacks, again, just going right to option 2, you'd likely need to acquire land for biosolids management, or looking to the future, land for potentially a new treatment plant site. There are still more stringent effluent limits. The existing site has old landfill materials that make construction a little bit more costly and difficult. And comparing it to option 1, it does require effluent pumping. The drawbacks of the brand new treatment plant site would be that it has the highest capital cost, especially if you're looking at growth at the current rate. You'll of course need land acquisition. It can possibly be challenging to site that due to setback distances required by code, and of course it would require pumping as well. So with that, we get into the capital costs, and remember that we looked at a couple different population projections when we did the evaluation. The solid bars here are the costs for population projections at the current rate of growth, which the Department of Administration is using in their population projections. So that's about 1% annual growth. And then we compared that with a high growth projection, which was about 2.5% annual growth, to provide a range of costs. So option 2, under the DOA projection or current growth rate, is about $32 million there. And you see that the option 3 costs are fairly similar, coming in at about $45 million under the DOA projections. We also looked at a total present worth evaluation where we take into account the costs of operation and maintenance over the course of the 20-year or the 40-year period. We wanted to look fairly far out into the future, which is why we also looked at a 40-year present worth. And you can see again the costs on that present worth basis are higher for option 3 when compared to option 2. And that's a similar story when you're comparing the high projection population projection versus the DOA projection. So then as you look at the preliminary impact on rates, you can see that to go from option 1 to option 3 was a net increase of about $300 a year. The increase to go from option 2 to option 3 was about $200 a year difference. And the rate increase can be phased for options 1 and 2 because the implementation of construction of those upgrades at the existing site don't have to happen all at once. They can be phased with a project now and a project approximately 10 years from now. Whereas if you were to build a new site, that cost would be incurred all at once, and you would have one rate increase to accommodate that. So the conclusions that we drew from this analysis was that a do-nothing alternative really wasn't feasible because of the age and condition of the plant and the new regulations being imposed by DNR and the compliance schedule that we're under. A lot of the equipment and processes are over 30 years old now, and due to age and condition, they need to be replaced. The existing treatment plant site does have adequate space over the next 40 years under those DOA projections, excluding biosolids management, which may eventually need to be moved off-site. The existing treatment plant site does not have adequate space 40 years from now under that high growth scenario. And we recommended that the city consider investing in land for both biosolids management and potentially a future new wastewater treatment plant site, but to continue to monitor growth and reevaluate those total present worth, especially depending on the level of growth that the city sees. And then just briefly touching on schedule, the next step would be to finalize the facility plan. I'm jumping down to late 2021 here to accommodate completing the facility plan and all of the meetings and public hearings that need to take place in early 2022 for ultimately meeting that compliance deadline of 2025. And I guess we'll pause here before we get into the survey discussion to go over any questions or anything you wanted to go through in more detail before we get into the survey. Okay.
This is Todd. I don't have any questions.
Okay.
Anybody else on the board?
Nothing right now. I'm curious to see the survey results.
Okay. All right, so the survey was sent out to promote some discussion at the meeting, especially now that you've had a chance to think about the presentation from last time and the tech memo that was put together. So the first few questions were geared toward growth. So what average residential growth you feel is most beneficial to the city over the next 20 to 40 years? And the unanimous answer out of the responses was residential growth at 1% annual, which is about 80% persons per year and is the current rate of growth in the city. Survey question 2 was what industrial growth do you feel is most beneficial to the city over the next 20 to 40 years? And four of the 5 responses were an increase in industrial loadings from 1.5% to 10%. So this is basically what we would typically plan for in our facility planning efforts. And there was 1 response for option C, which was the flexibility to allow major wet industries that would result in industrial flows greater than 10%. So that would be a greater flow than we would normally assume from industry. And again, the more significant growth options would correlate more to option 3, whereas the more status quo growth options would correlate more to option 2. Survey question 3 was how beneficial to the city is growth north of Interstate 94 in your opinion? Again, 4 of the 5 responses were that there was either a benefit or a drawback for growth north of I-94, with 1 response stating that growth north of I-94 is important and should be promoted by the city. So response B would correlate more to option 2 versus if you were to build a new treatment plant site north of the interstate, obviously that would accommodate growth north of the interstate better. Survey question 4, how important is flexibility regarding future expansion of the wastewater and other utilities? We had 1 response stating that the flexibility to accommodate capacity beyond the current growth rates is not important. The 4 remaining responses said flexibility is important. So that flexibility to accommodate higher than anticipated growth comes at a cost, and in the case of the ultimate flexibility of having a brand new treatment plant site would have the costs that we were talking about of going to option 3 versus option 2. Question 5 regarding future expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. This was a split. So the question is expanding outside of the current footprint of the existing treatment plant property, remaining in a residential commercial area, an acceptable preferred solution to you? And 2 responses said that 2 responses said that expanding outside of the current footprint was acceptable. 3 said that expanding outside of the current footprint was not acceptable. And the last question, should the city invest in land outside the current city limits within the next 1 to 3 years to reserve a site for either a new treatment plant or biosolids management? And unanimous was that yes, that is something that the city should be investing in. So I guess any initial reactions? Anybody want to start any discussion or talk about any of these questions in more detail?
Yeah, this is Greg. I'm usually the quiet one. I have 2 questions, but it's actually the same question, but it concerns number 2 and number 3. The wet, the C. There's 1 person there that felt that, and that's fine. Should we allow wet industries? And so my question is, does someone know something that we should know? And actually, if you flip over to question number 3, it's really the same question. Number C, growth north of interstate. I don't mind sharing. I fell into the B category. but I did qualify my response by saying, well, it really depends on the business that wants to go there. If it's something that's going to really knock us out of our contention and going to cause the city undoable or duress, maybe not. So I qualified my answer for number B, but I did use number B for my answer. But I do wonder the person who, and you don't have to name who you are, I'm just wondering if someone knows something about the growth of north of 94. Just qualify that a little bit more. They're both my questions are really the same. Number 2 and number 3. Is there something that we should know about that are, maybe there's some development in the wings that could influence this type of decision? That's all.
Yes, this is Steve. I was the C. When you look at the city and the layout, we really only have limited opportunities to grow as far as the industrial park. Our current industrial park is presently full. I think there's maybe one lot left. So any industry that's coming to Lake Mills right now and says, hey, we're interested, we're basically saying we don't have any shovel-ready site ready for you. We just don't have any opportunity. So on a council end, we're looking at where do we start to develop an area where we can draw some business in or give opportunities. That goes back to some of the base load that would be nice to have for our electrical utility to have 24-hour demand versus just morning rush hour making coffee and then people coming home at night watching TV and going to bed, where we have all this capacity and we only use it periodically. The one thing they're looking at is going north of the interstate. That's the best opportunity to do a development because you keep your on-off on interstate. It keeps it out of the downtown area. So it's looking at some of the flexibility to go north. Council end, they're looking at, you can really only go north or south. We can't go west, the lake is in the way, and it's going to be a challenge to go east. You're getting further away from your on-off access to the interstate. So that's kind of the logic behind it, that we are very limited in where we go for a shovel-ready industrial park.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you.
I would add just really quick here, and I know Steve has been on some of the discussions at the council level. There's always, I think, Betsy, I'm saying this right, there's almost always inquiries about the north side. Nothing really solid has come up, but it's always a topic of discussion. It really is. So who knows what might happen there. I would say this, that's probably the more desired direction, to go north as opposed to south.
I have a quick question, not necessarily in regard to the poll, but there was just option 3A for the new wastewater treatment plant. It's described as the new oxidation ditch, and that's said to be a similar operation to the existing wastewater treatment plant. I know in the pros and cons list there was discussion about staff familiarity being a positive for keeping the old site. Does any of that transfer over, like staff familiarity, if you utilize the same process for wastewater treatment? So like if you go to new oxidation ditch, option 3A, is there some spillover knowledge and benefit there that the staff would have, or is it kind of negligible?
No, I would say that yes, there is a benefit there of running a similar process. So yes, I would say that's an advantage. I guess I'll jump in here with a question. I'm curious. This was probably the most split of the answers. Question 5. Curious about thoughts on expanding outside the current footprint of the existing treatment plant site in the future. Again, we're not saying that this is needed in the immediate process, or sorry, the immediate project, but at some point, depending on growth, expanding outside the existing footprint could be pretty beneficial to delaying potentially having to move the entire plant. There is some city-owned land that currently is a berm that it would be costly to remove that old landfill material, but I guess is that something that that could be considered on the table down the road 20, 30 years from now, or is the thought that long-term remaining in a residential area just isn't palatable? Just curious on the thoughts there, especially given that we had a split in the responses.
So, Mark here. I certainly thought that the land currently owned by the city adjacent to the wastewater treatment plant, which currently has, it used to be the main substation for the city, and now it still has some transformers in it, I believe, but it's pretty minimal, I believe. And then there's a berm behind that. Maybe that's what you're referring to, Travis, or else the berm someplace else.
Nope, that's what I was talking about.
Right. And in front of the berm is a substation, which I think could be eliminated.
I'd say that's right, Mark.
I guess I'm curious if my question was more: is there an overall philosophy that you just don't want to have a treatment plant site in a residential area any longer? Does anyone have an opinion on that? Is that a project driver?
Well, let me ask this question. I thought when we talked in the last meeting about that potential expansion around the existing wastewater treatment site, say for example, if more industry came to the city or population growth was more than expected, I seem to recall that there wasn't a whole lot of options for that, or that it wasn't great options. Maybe this is a question for Paul or Steve. Correct me if I'm wrong. That was my memory of the last meeting.
I think that's close. If we look at just the area where the substation is, and then if you were to go east, like where the yard waste center is, that's pretty limited. But I recall we also talked about maybe going across the street and using the property that the DPW Parks building is on. That including that piece would open up some options. So I think there were two parts to that discussion.
And last month we did not discuss the electric substation area. That was not brought up. It wasn't considered as an option.
I'd have to go back and look. To my way of thinking, it kind of was, but not the berm. We kind of threw that out because it would be a real problem. But right now, what's in that space, as you pointed out, Mark, is storage and then a small transformer, which really probably within the next 5 years will be going away anyway. So whether it was or wasn't, it certainly can be.
I guess, Travis, to answer your question, on my end of it, I'll say I was the one that voted yes. And more of my logic was whether we do option 2 or option 3, we still need land off-site. We're going to end up moving sludge storage off-site. For me, it's in operations and plant facility maintenance is when you have multiple sites that you're operating, it always makes it more challenging versus if you can get something where your entire operation is on one site. Your employees aren't traveling, you don't have the trucking, you have better management with everything on one site. I guess that was more of my logic to this, not so much it being in a residential area, because the people built around it, they get it. It's the operational end of it. How do we make it better for our employees and make it more efficient than anything else?
This is Greg. I also voted yes on this question for this exact same reason Todd just explained.
That was Steve who did that. This is Todd.
So I'll just jump in and say, my thought is, I get that this is a very expensive project. There are serious considerations with rate. I mean, this is very significant. Oh, almost either way you go, I get that there's a positive in terms of option 2, in terms of that it can be staggered and it's a more reasonable option. For me, we'll just say it outright, I'm leaning more toward option 3. I don't have a particular affinity to either one of A, B, or C. I mean, if I had to choose right now, A seems like a nice option in that it's what we have done. There's some familiarity with the staff. But from our conversation last month, you know, this more so centered around DNR limitations in terms of you know, phosphorus and nitrogen discharge, and just knowing that that was likely going to get more strict in the future. I just feel like a new site, while it's expensive, I get that it's not going to be popular, seems to be in the long-term interest of the city. I mean, we had a presentation on the electric grid, and there was a discussion about how we made a substantial investment. I get that it didn't have the same impact to rates, but we are in a much better position now than when we were, you know, where we were 15 years ago. And we're benefiting from that, and we don't have to make hard decisions at this point. So I'm for advocating for one of the options within option 3. Open to any of them. Option 3A seems like a good place to start for me.
I would say that the difference between option 2 and option 3 in terms of DNR requirements for discharge are relatively minor, and they're the same for nitrogen because that would be a new requirement. They're the same for total phosphorus. Travis, can you respond further on if what I'm saying is true or mostly false?
So I just shifted back to the slide with the limits. So if you're just comparing option 2 to option 3, you have a difference in BOD limit that's shown here. You have a difference, it's the same TSS limit, a different nitrogen limit, and the phosphorus limit would actually be the same, with it being the same discharge location. So that's the benefit of option 2 over option 1, is that you don't have that strict phosphorus limit.
And is the BOD and nitrogen differences between option 2 and option 3 significant?
I would say that's not nearly as significant as the impact from the phosphorus, the new phosphorus limit.
Right. And the only, as we discussed last month, the only reason the BOD and nitrogen are different is because the plant currently can do that, what the limits are for option 2, and the DNR says, well, if your plant can do that, it should continue to do that. That's the only reason for the tighter limits of option 2 versus option 3.
Yeah, there's anti-backsliding involved, that they wouldn't let you go to a less strict limit. It's not the case for phosphorus because that limit hasn't gone into effect yet. That's still a few years out in the compliance schedule.
So I don't see the discharge limits of option 2 versus option 3 being a significant factor in the decision making.
Jane, if you're still on the line, I'm curious your thoughts on, from a regulatory standpoint, advantages of option 3 over option 2.
Yeah, I'm still here. So I think option 2 would be more, if you're looking out another 20 or 40 years where flows start increasing even more than what we're talking about with this facility plan, the DNR might hold the city to mass limits associated with those BOD limits. So the BOD limits shown here are concentration, but they'd multiply that times the design flow for the new treatment plant, and they might hold the city to that mass unless it could be demonstrated that the city would have like economic hardship trying to meet those mass limits. But that's out there in the pretty distant future, I would say. And DNR also said that in terms of anti-degradation, anti-backsliding, that type of a BOD mass limit wouldn't be too hard to get approved to increase. But I guess that's the only caveat to what you said earlier that I would add, Travis. And if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think it would be a fair statement that option 2 addresses addresses most of the regulatory concerns with changing the discharge to the Crawfish River. It eliminates the concern with the low-level phosphorus limit, and it also addresses the concern of Rock Creek potentially being reclassified in the future, which would result in stricter limits. I think I would say the main differentiator as far as advantages between option 2 and option 3 would be the capacity for higher growth than what the city is currently experiencing, and also growth in the area north of the interstate. That would really give the advantage to option 3 versus option 2.
This is Steve. It's kind of a shame that DNR doesn't allow backslide even when you make this large investment. They almost try to push you towards a new plant, it seems like. Just looking at some of the growth in the city, I'm kind of leaning towards option 3. I like the A and the C just because I like the technology. It gives us so many options down the road especially when we don't know how things are going to change or how regulations are going to strengthen or tighten up or where they might go. It's just giving ourselves options. So hopefully we don't have significant investments down the road. So that's kind of my 2 cents.
So this is Greg with one more comment. I'm wondering if it would just be easier to do option 3 now than down the road, in terms of will the land be available down the road, or will less availabilities be down the road, in the future if you end up having to do option 3, 40 years from now. So that's one of my questions is it easier to do option 3 right now than in the future?
I would say yes, especially from a cost standpoint, because there are immediate needs at the existing site, and kind of a fourth option that's not shown here but would be the most costly option would be to make further significant investments in the existing site and then decide to move 10 to 20 years from now. That would have a higher cost than any of the options shown.
Exactly. Yep. Thank you.
Well, I think it's completely unrealistic that we would run out of capacity on the current site and be forced to move to a new site in the next 10 to 20 years. That's completely unrealistic in my mind.
Yeah, I agree with Mark on that one. It seems like option 3 is just based on too many, this might happen and this might happen.
Could you, Travis, pull up the preliminary rate impact slide? So if we do any of the option 3s, we're talking about increasing the rates by a factor of 2 to 2.5 right away, as soon as we build that plant. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, because there's no ways to phase it. You'd have to build it all at once.
Versus option 2, which can start out as option 1, there's a lot of increments before you get to that $1,000 doubling the rate, correct?
Yeah, so option 2, you could basically do roughly half of it now and then another half of it in 10 years. That exact split, we would want to work through the details of which with city staff, but yes, you could roughly split that in half right now.
But knowing that you do half 10 years from now, it's not going to be that cost. In 10 years, that cost is going to be exaggerated somewhat just for increases over the next 10 years for construction costs, technology costs. Prices always go up. They never go down on construction.
Yep. That's true.
But if you build a plant now, it'll need repairs that much sooner. So if you build a plant now, it's going to need repairs in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. That's something you have to consider too.
Absolutely. I agree with you totally, but we have a 30-year-old plant that 30, 40 years now will be a 60 or 70-year-old plant, and it's going to need even more repairs. So I follow the logic. You're absolutely correct, but we're starting with 30-year-old bones versus new bones too.
Well, I'm going to ask the strand here. What's the lifetime of the oxidation ditch, the concrete?
I would say 40 years before you'd have to make significant structural repairs.
40 years from now, or 40 years from when it was built?
40 years from when it was built. So I guess I do want to point out that in the total present worth costs, we did factor in costs for repairs for the structures over the course of those 40-year periods. We also took into account the salvage value of the structures. So that's the benefit of this total present worth evaluation. It takes into account the capital costs, the annual operation and maintenance costs of things like electricity and chemicals, and then it takes into account estimated costs for repairs in the future, and then if there is any life expectancy still in the structures at the end of the 40 years, it's taking that into account as well. So this would be kind of the true cost in today's dollars when you're comparing the different alternatives shown on this graph here.
This is Greg. Can I ask if there were any decommission or disposition costs of the existing plant factored into this?
Yes, there are costs for that factored in for option 3. You wouldn't be completely abandoning the existing site. You would still have a pumping station located at the existing site in option 3. So there would just, still be there would still be a city-owned parcel there for that purpose indefinitely.
So in terms of moving this conversation along, I know that last meeting, we held a vote to decide if we wanted to keep option 1 in consideration or not. What are the board's thoughts on doing the same thing for option 2, whether we still want to consider it or not, or if we want to move to option 3? I get we have divergent views on the board. It's a tough decision, but just to keep this moving in consideration of the time constraints we have.
Yeah, this is Todd. If the board feels like you have enough information to make a motion.
And really what it is a decision between option 2 and option 3.
Yeah.
Yep, and then we can move on, and if depending on what happens with that vote, then we can get more into if we decide to eliminate option 2, we can decide what specific sub option we would want for option 3, if it were to go that way. People on board with that, or do they have more questions or want to discuss more?
I don't know, Mark and I already expressed our opinions on our preference for option 2.
This is Greg. I'm open to considering option 2 in order to keep it on the board. I am leaning towards option 3, one of the 3, A, B, or C, A or C. But I'm open to keeping option 2 on the table and revisiting and keeping the discussion going.
Okay, so Paul, when you need a recommendation by the December meeting, or?
I'm a little torn. We really want to keep it moving, but I also want to make sure it's a solid decision and one everybody can live with. So, yes, Travis and I talked, and I believe there's only going to be one council meeting in December. That'll be the first Tuesday, I think, because of the holidays. So that we can move it to then, but then we might have to have some kind of a virtual meeting or something in between. I guess I'm going a long way around here. I would say, yeah, the December meeting would probably be cutting it really close, because keep in mind that we do have to file a facilities report with the DNR.
And we are being rushed. I mean, the municipal building project, that took 51 meetings for the council to decide on what to do. And this has only been maybe the 3rd meeting.
Paul, this is Dwayne. Just one comment. Will the Public Works Board meeting will actually happen after the council meeting in December, will it not?
Yeah.
For point of reference.
This is Misty. I just want to also point out that I have not heard that we're canceling the second city council meeting in December. The only thing that I've heard is that we won't be having the first meeting in January.
Okay, and I guess obviously if there's a decision this big to be made, there will be a meeting will be had, right? So my question then is, what do you need between now and then to make the decision, or to be ready for a recommendation? What kind of information can we provide, or how do we want to do that?
This is Todd. I myself have enough information.
Yeah, I mean, speaking for myself, I appreciate that it's a very difficult decision, and we're talking about serious impact to ratepayers in Lake Mills. But I feel like we've got all the information, and then some. I mean, I think there was a great job that Travis, that you and your team did putting this together.
And to be honest, I'm pretty sure the vote will not go my way, but I understand why the other board members are voting for option 3, and it's not something that I'm going to be very angry about or be publicly criticize. I'll just move on. So,
Do we have all of our people here? Is John Reich here today?
No, that's a good point, Mark. I was
Yeah.
going to make that too. John is not here. So if you want to delay it so that you're sure that he has some input, because it does affect the town, and
yeah,
so that would be totally
that's a good
understandable.
point. That's a good point.
What do we want to call
So
a
to
special
keep this
meeting?
moving, yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Can we get a special meeting on maybe in a couple weeks or something, or?
Dan is on yet. I think I'm assuming. Go ahead. Okay. If you couldn't hear that, Dave just stepped in and said that he's installing equipment in this room December 17th and after. So it would have to be before that, which I think we're talking about anyway. But Dan, if you're still there, there's nothing wrong with a special meeting, right? There's no legalities there or anything, right?
No, just so long as it's noticed appropriately. But if we hold the second meeting of the council, the third week of December, there would be the Public Works Board meeting the week in between the two council meetings. So maybe the regular meeting works and you can still get a recommendation to the council for the third week in December. Otherwise, certainly you could hold a special meeting so long as it's noticed appropriately.
Understood. And then just let me, Travis, ask you a question. Are we going to get sideways with the DNR, or can we let them know what's going on? And
So DNR did request that if the decision was, trending towards option 3, or if there was a good chance of option 3 being selected, they did want to have a meeting to discuss that, because it's obviously a big deal to move a treatment plant. I guess we may want to do that in the near term here. But I think keeping a schedule with making a decision in December, I don't have significant concerns with that time frame.
okay, so maybe what I'm hearing is that we should give them a heads up that we are looking at that. And okay, please understand, I'm not totally afraid of the DNR. But we certainly want to make sure they understand what's going on. So it sounds like if we can meet on a regular day in December with the understanding that that will be a decision day, then let's do that.
That's also requiring the city council to decide right away and not have multiple meetings as well, correct?
Well, that's another good point, Mark. And what we've done is tried to encourage them to watch these meetings, and so that they get all the background, they get the discussion. They're still going to have some, and they may totally change everything that we're talking about here, but I don't want this to be wasted time. And so we will encourage them to listen and learn from what you're going through and try to make a decision as quickly as they can. Maybe with, keeping the DNR as informed as we can, they'll understand that we might not hit the exact minute that we have to have this report in.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So essentially, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say Travis is kind of hesitantly nodding his head, but I think we can make that work.
I guess just back to the point, technically, we're just making a recommendation to the city board. And the city board could technically go back and say, you know what, Public Works Board, we don't like where you're going with this one. We actually want option 1, even though you guys eliminated that back in October. Right? That's a possibility that could happen.
It is. and I'm not going to try to guess how anybody's going to do anything. My hope, and that's all it is my hope, that they would take into major consideration what you're discussing, and that they still might go back and say, yep, one is the best regardless. But I would hope with the work that you put into this, they gain some insights and understand that you made a recommendation for a reason.
So this is a question for Dan Drescher. I know that we don't have John Reich on the call. What is the possibility of holding some type of vote tonight and getting a proxy vote from him after the fact? Or can you just not pull something like that?
No, he's not in attendance tonight. He's not voting on this issue if you vote tonight. You have a quorum. You can take action on this item by motion because it's noticed on the agenda. If a member's not here, he's not to be considered.
But he could attend the city council meeting at public comment.
Certainly.
And say, you know, I wasn't at the board, but if I would have been, I would have picked this option. So.
Here's my recommendation. Here's my recommendation is that this is a big decision, but we can him and haw over this for a while, or we can just take a vote and make some type of recommendation. It's not set in stone.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, he can just attend public comment and give his. I mean, I've gone to public comment and given my opinion. So if he disagrees with our recommendation, he can personally go to the city council meeting and say, I don't recommend the recommendation. But so I guess I would like to entertain a motion for a recommendation for the council then, so we can keep things going.
So just what's the best way? What's the best way to do this? Could it be we have a motion for like, hey, who wants to consider option 2, and then we just have an up-down vote and go down the line? Is that the best way to do this?
If you're not in favor of option 2, make a motion to say do not do option 2.
Okay.
And obviously,
I'll make option.
Yeah, so because the last meeting we said do not do option 1, so we'll have a motion then to not do option 2. And if that motion passes, then obviously option 3 is the winner.
Okay, so I will make a motion to remove option 2 from consideration.
Okay.
This is Bennett Rupplinger.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, so we're at discussion. I don't have anything
I'm sorry,
more
who made the second? Was that Mr. Fields?
Yeah.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
So obviously the motion is to not do option 2. So if you vote yes, obviously it's going to be option 3. If you vote no, that means option 2 is still on the board. Does everyone understand that? Mark?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Understood.
So I don't have anything more. Obviously, I support option 2, but I understand why the other board members are going with option 3. Any more discussion? Okay, Misty, can you do the roll call vote then?
Mr. Temperley?
No.
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Mr. Polachek?
Yes.
Mr. Rupplinger?
Aye.
Mr. Picard?
No.
Motion passed 3-2.
So now there's details behind option 3 then, Paul, right? Is there more discussion on that, or is that enough for now?
So,
Go ahead, Mark.
yeah, I'm just going to ask the question that you're probably going to answer is that a critical path? Is that something we need to figure out tonight, or is that something that's down the road several months?
Well, I guess I'm taking Todd's question a little differently and thinking of it more short term. Here's my problem. I guess, if you will, it doesn't exactly come across as a recommendation other, other than eliminating an option. So what I'm wondering is, how would you like this presented to the council? And two parts, how and when? Are you ready to have it presented to them next week? And is it just, here's our motion, and or how do we present the background? Otherwise, Steve is obviously the council rep, so he would make some comments. Or since you've eliminated two options, do you want to come back in December and see if Travis can flesh out the different options a little bit more? I'm not sure what all there might be to that. I have to admit, I'm not quite sure how to proceed. And maybe Dan, do you have any insights as to how we might do this?
Well, we need more direction, I think. I'd be comfortable at this point saying that the Public Works Board recommendation is any of option 3, 3A, 3B, or 3C moving forward to the council based on the motions that I've heard the last two meetings. Is that enough, or does the Public Works Board want more of an opportunity to kind of flesh out the idea and refine it before it goes to the council, I guess is where we're at right now.
Yeah, thank you.
And this is Dwayne, if I may. Travis also mentioned possibly having a meeting with the DNR now that 3 is kind of leaning a little bit.
Yeah, Dwayne, great segue there, Dwayne. I had the same thought. I'm a little cloudy. I think if at this point, if you wanted to gain more information by scheduling a meeting with the DNR and then, reworking with Travis and presenting that new information based on option 3 to the Public Works Board in December, maybe that's the route. I mean, it needs to be a deliberate process in that it's such a big expense, such a big decision, and there's definitely progress moving forward here. So I'm sure that would satiate the DNR, at least momentarily.
Yeah, regardless of which option is chosen, DNR ultimately needs to approve the facility plan that results from the plan moving forward. So, yeah, I think that's a good approach, especially with the decision leaning towards option 3. I think we definitely need to have a meeting with DNR in the very near future here.
So,
and likely, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
No, okay. So would it be the direction of the board to schedule a meeting with the DNR and then be prepared to report out on that in the December meeting? Is that okay? And then see if there's any additional information you want to present to the council at the following meeting? Is that acceptable?
Or do you want to go right to council in the first meeting?
Yeah, can't the council vote on a recommendation to throw out option 1 and 2 at least? And then their second meeting in December, they get into the details of option 3?
Well, here's, again, I don't want to put words in somebody's mouth. I don't want to go to the council and say, the Public Works Board voted to not consider option 1 and 2.
Which we did. It's on record.
Well, you did, but okay. I'm so concerned.
A more refined recommendation from the Public Works Board is definitely a desirable thing, generally speaking. So if you want more of a crack at the apple here, this is your opportunity.
I was going to say voting down option 1 and option 2 is saying that we're basically selecting option 3.
Yeah.
And we're looking for a little bit more feedback on the 3 technologies and what the opportunity and feedback from the DNR so that they may say, hey, we want to steer you towards this particular option that's going to be easier to permit or easier to cite. Let's get some of their feedback. They might steer us to one of these options.
But I
understood.
If there's any doubt that City Council will possibly select option 2, I think you want to know that sooner rather than later. So I would recommend having the City Council vote sooner rather than later.
If their experience is anything like ours, I'm sure it's going to take them more than one meeting to kind of think this over, right? I mean, that would be my guess, but I don't know. There are people with more expertise on, you know, the dynamics of the city board than I on this meeting.
I don't know if it's a case of more expertise. It's just, you know, that they're a different body, different opinions and attitudes. I don't, you know, the expertise level I don't think is different. I want to make sure we don't take a step back. I guess I'm saying it. I just want to make sure when we walk into the council, you know, that we're saying the right things to the right people at the right time. Again, it's a huge decision, and I'm by no means trying to stop you from option 3 or 2 or 1. That's not my point at all. It's just making sure that we're ready with whatever recommendation we made. So let me go back then. We definitely won't be ready for the next council meeting because we do want to meet with the DNR prior to presenting it to the council. So then my question becomes, do we gather that information from the DNR, have the meeting, and report back to this board? Or do we simply then go to the council and say the recommendation from the Public Works Board was to eliminate option 1 and 2, and here's our follow-up discussion with the DNR in that regard?
I would say go ahead and have a discussion or put some good music. Who play music?
I think that was a sign. Done talking.
That was mine. I don't know why that came on. I'm sorry. Well, anyway, the council can at least have a discussion on our options that we threw out, right? So that way they're better prepared for the second meeting to go into details of option 3.
So just a suggestion, perhaps the details of which option 3 gets selected could be sorted out during the finalizing the facility plan, which will ultimately have to be approved at some point anyway. So I guess maybe we don't, this is just a thought, maybe we don't have to select which sub option gets selected in December. Maybe that could, maybe the recommendation for that can come out of the draft facility plan, working with staff, and then ultimately get approved, you know, in January or February. That's one approach.
I got it. And that would include a discussion with the DNR prior to. So you're saying, if I'm boiling this down, is that we would go to the council with the information we've got now and the recommendation to eliminate option 1 and 2, have a meeting with the DNR, and then prepare the final facilities plan for consideration by the council. And they would have to approve that then too.
I think we still want to meet with DNR first, but I'm just saying maybe we don't have to have the council decide on which sub option right away.
Oh, I see. Okay. Steve, let me ask you though, should they be informed of the direction that this board has made? I mean, you kind of have made a recommendation, so they're going to see that motion.
Absolutely. I saw that when we were voting on number 2 that was talked about this evening, that basically we're moving forward with option 3. So basically by taking 1 and 2 off the table, this committee is saying option 3 is our choice. I mean, that's all that's left on the table. That's what we're talking about. So it's coming to council, that's what we're saying, is that basically we're saying option 3 is our decision. We just haven't picked which sub option, the technology. We're looking for Strand to meet with the DNR, make sure this is going to work, or even see if the DNR steers us to one of these options, and then we're going to have to make some decisions based on that.
Okay. I just came to the realization that I'm making this more complicated than it has to be. So I think we have our direction. We do have a motion that will be reported to the council, and then we'll go through the steps that we have to go through. Everyone comfortable with that then?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yes.
I'm comfortable.
All right, thank you, and my compliments. This is big time stuff, and really appreciate how you worked through it and helped us get some direction here. So thank you very much.
Nice job. Thank you.
All right, agenda item 8, recommendations for future agendas. I do not have any. Anybody from the board have any?
No.
Todd,
Okay, go ahead, Bill.
I'm sorry, I keep stepping on people. Obviously the infrastructure bill has been passed. We don't know everything that's in that or how it's going to be doled out, I guess, if you will, but somewhere down the road here, we're going to want to have a meeting on what that may mean for Lake Mills. So I don't think it'll be next month or maybe not within the next few months, but we want to talk about that.
It's going to take a while for them to start writing checks out, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm ready to write right now. But yeah, it's still a political process.
Yeah.
I was listening to some of the chatter about how it's going to all lay out, and clearly nobody really knows yet. So
No, it's going to take months. So, all righty. All right. Well, then, no recommendation for future agendas. I'll adjourn the meeting.